When I was a senior in college a few years ago, I lived in an old house about a 5-minute walk from my campus with 5 of my girlfriends. It was still COVID times, so we spent a lot of time just in the house since we could not really go elsewhere. This house was old, and many of the windows didn't lock. Our landlord sucked, as many college ones do, and did not do anything to fix this issue. But with it being 6 of us, and often a boyfriend or 2 sleeping in the house, it felt mostly safe, and many of us would keep our windows open. Our college was in a town just outside of the second most dangerous city in the state, but right around the campus it felt relatively safe. When the weather started getting warmer in early spring, we would sit out on the roof to sunbathe, and this roof faced our street. We would access the roof from my roommate's, let's call her Mary, bedroom window on the 2nd floor since it led straight to the roof. Our street was residential and did not get a ton of traffic, but we did have a couple encounters of younger guys catcalling us as they drove by. But nothing seemed sinister as we were college kids. One night late in the semester, Mary went up to her room to call her brother while the rest of us were hanging downstairs. That's when she rushed downstairs and said she saw a ladder leading up to the roof where we would all sunbathe and right near her window, which was open. Later we learned she said out loud to her brother what she saw before she came down. When she told us this, my other roommate and her boyfriend ran outside to find a man running away from our house with the freaking ladder, who we assumed Mary telling her brother she saw the ladder and knew he was caught. It was dark, so they could not make out anything about him. I immediately texted our landlord asking if he had someone come by the house to do any work, and he said no. We then called the police, who came by. They did some investigating and patrolled our house for a couple of nights, but we never found out who the man was, what his intentions were, or if he had been there before. Back in 2021, I used to deliver for Uber Eats on my e-scooter when I needed some extra cash. I preferred late nights, about 11 to 2 a.m., because the tips were better and I didn't have to worry about as many people. On this particular night in August at about 1 a.m., a delivery took me to an apartment complex by a university close to the edge of my city. I love doing deliveries by this university. There is a nice bike trail I'd ride on for a while after dropping off orders. The customer gets their Taco Bell and I turn around excited for my little ride. Near the intersection that leads to the university and the trail, there's a weird circular median, not a roundabout, and a little strip mall to my left. As I'm coasting down to the intersection, a black Dodge Charger quickly turns out in front of me and circles around the median, turning back into the strip mall to the park. Facing the trail on the other side of the road, I immediately noticed 3 things. No plates front or back. The windows were incredibly tinted. It was night, but still I could see absolutely nothing. His headlights weren't on. I just got an insanely weird feeling. It didn't have any hallmarks of an undercover cop car, something was just wrong. I get up to the little intersection, hop onto the sidewalk to press the crosswalk button and get across quicker. And I see a dude on a bike on the other side of the intersection, obviously staring at the car. The bike dude is also in front of the beginning of the trail. So I decide to ask him about the car as I cross the intersection. I've never seen a man that looked so spent. He was skinny and just looked exhausted. He didn't seem like he was on anything, despite how rail thin he was. As I approach the dude on the bike, the person in the car turns the headlights on, illuminating us across the street. I was honestly kind of freaking out at this point and just wanted any kind of context or information. He told me that the man in that car had been following him for weeks now and that he didn't know what to do. I suggested calling the police and he immediately shot it down. He said he tried and they wouldn't help him. I asked why they didn't and he implied that the guy in the car was affiliated with the police. I asked if there was anything I could do to help and he just told me to leave. He said there was nothing I can do for him and it was best not to involve myself. His tone was dead serious. No longer in the mood for a trail ride, I take his advice and get out of there. As I begin riding off, the car cuts the headlights back off and turns back across the circular median, this time coming to a stop in the road leading from the apartment complex instead of making a full circle. Bike dude was still standing there. Neither bike dude nor the guy in the car was there when I first approached to make the delivery. It was generally the most freaky and weird thing I've ever seen. I still don't know what to make of it, because the car was 100% with the guy. But for weeks like he said, and for what purpose? I've also been around people in psychosis before, and if he was mentally ill or tweaking, he was doing a damn good job at hiding it. I honestly wish I asked him more questions, but I felt a pit in my stomach from the time I saw the car until it was finally out of my line of sight. I could have also been overblowing it, but I felt like prey. Maybe someone else has some insight. I just got back from a trip to New York City. I go there multiple times a year as I have family and a handful of close friends that live there. I've been meaning to post this since it happened a couple of nights ago, but I wanted to make sure I had the time to sit down and regather all the details correctly. I'm sure we've all heard crazy subway stories at one point or another, but I never thought I would end up in one this terrifying. I was heading back to my hotel from a friend's house at about 3 a.m. the other night. My friend lives deep in Brooklyn and my hotel was in Manhattan, so if you know the city, you know that's about a 30 to 45 minute long train ride give or take. My train finally arrived and I was happy to be headed home. I was exhausted and it was late. My trip had been going unexpectedly well up until this point, so I had faith I'd be able to get home with no worries, especially since the train and streets were basically empty at this hour. The train was brand new and had just been cleaned, something I've never seen before. Hell, it even smelled like a new car and still had fresh mop water on the floor. There was only about 3 other people on my train, all minding their own business. So far so good. About 2 stops into the train ride, a man that looked like he was in his late 20s stumbled into our train car mid-ride through the connecting doors of the cars. He had on a Nike ski mask, a shiesty mask, if you know you know, which usually isn't a good sign on a nice 70-degree night in general context. But I'm not one to judge by appearance. Plus, I know the shiesty mask is sort of a trend nowadays, so I didn't think too much of it at first. He sort of hobbled in, and he was clutching his stomach, almost as if he was concealing something or hiding a wound. His eyes were bloodshot red, and at first, I thought it was because he was high or something. He immediately hobbled into the nearest corner and sort of sulked into the corner, facing it until the next stop. He then ran out the closest door and erupted into the most painful crying I've ever heard. He was just screaming, moaning, and crying, all while stumble running alongside the stopped train on the platform, still clutching his stomach, screaming things like, "Why?" and gasping through his tears. Keep in mind, I'm sitting in the middle of the train facing away from the side he got off, so I'm kind of breaking my neck behind me as he's running behind me to watch what's going on. He then ran back inside the same car, through the door on the opposite side of the car now. He was on my right before, now he's on my left. There is no one in between me and him, now since everyone else was closer to the right side. He did the sulking while facing into the corner thing on the other side of the car now, but this time, he kept scream crying and yelling things like "why" again. But he was crying so hysterically that it was hard to make out a lot of what he was saying. From the certain words I gathered though, I'm almost positive that a very close friend of his had just gotten killed or something. It's the only thing that would explain the way he was acting and the things he was saying. Plus, he was suited up like he had just came back from a street mission gone bad or something. At this point, everyone on the train was frantically flicking their eyes over to him every few seconds. You can tell they were panicked, but not trying to cause a scene about it or rile him up more. I was getting a little sussed out myself, but I had seen and heard about worse on the subway, and if someone he knew had really just died, then I honestly felt horrible for the guy before anything else. But then the entire situation escalated to a point that I had only seen in movies or crime shows until now. The man stayed in the corner, crying, screaming, and muttering things to himself for another 3 minutes or so, all while still clutching his stomach as if he was concealing something. I had definitely seen a black object in his hands by this point, but I couldn't tell if it was big enough to be a gun or not. After I saw this, I tried not to take my eyes off him for too long at a time since I was the closest person to him, but I also didn't want to stare. By this point, he was starting to say concerning things like, "Someone's gotta pay for this," and then he would just repeat it louder and louder. And then he burst into a dialogue that made my heart drop. Keep in mind, he's still facing the corner hunched over clutching his item. "All you sitting on this train right now, y'all gonna feel me tonight, you hear me? Y'all gonna feel me tonight, and y'all gonna hate it too. Oh my, y'all gonna hate this, y'all gonna hate me. He kept getting louder and louder as he was saying this, to the point where he was basically screaming by the last part. I don't know what he said after that, because as soon as the train stopped next, I bolted. He was screaming at me as I got off, but I couldn't hear it, and I definitely wasn't trying to turn back. I ran back up to the nearest street exit, chain smoked a couple cigarettes, and waited 20 minutes for the next train to come. I've seen enough in my life to know that this wasn't a situation I was willing to gamble with at all. I pray the last 3 people on that train got home safe and nothing happened. I briefly searched Twitter and the news the next day for any possible info I can find, and I didn't see anything. But who even knows what's worth a headline to them down there anymore?